Hello, my name is Jenni Werner, and in addition to being a board member at ImageOut, I'm also the literary director at Jiva Theater Center. And it is my absolute honor to host this conversation today about Surviving the Silence, which is one of the really wonderful documentaries in ImageOut's lineup this year. So I'm so excited to introduce you to the subjects of the film and to the filmmaker. Before we get started, I want to read just a quick excerpt from the summary of the film on Surviving the Silence's website, just so that everyone is on the same page. And don't worry, if you haven't seen the film yet, that's okay. We won't give away all of the secrets anyway. And if you have seen the film, hopefully this will give you just a little more context and appreciation for what the subjects of the film have gone through. So let me get started. So in 1992, Colonel Pat Thompson was a decorated Army nurse, only 2 years away from retirement. She was asked to preside over the military review board that eventually dismissed Col Margareta Kamameyer for admitting she was a lesbian. Although Thompson had served her country with distinction for over 30 years, from conflict zones in Central America to working inside the Pentagon, that appointment was perhaps the hardest. In that moment, she had to protect her own life secret, that she too was a lesbian and living privately with her life partner, Barbara Brass, for many years. So let's get started. I'm going to introduce our panel. And as I'm introducing each of them, I'm going to imagine that you all sitting on your couch at home or at your kitchen table are applauding with each introduction. So first, I want to bring in Cindy L. Abel, who is the filmmaker, writer, producer, and director. Cindy, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having us. It's great to be with you.
Absolutely. And now I want to bring in Colonel Patsy Thompson, retired Air Force nurse, Army National Guard chief nurse, and Barbara Brass, founder of the RATT PAC, which we'll talk more about what that is in a little bit. Thank you both for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here.
It is.
In New York.
We're excited.
And Colonel Pat, I want to thank you for your service.
Thank you.
And also with us is Mary Newcombe, who is a former attorney formerly with the Lambda Legal Defense and Action Fund. Mary, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. I'm pleased to be here.
And we may have, hopefully, we're having a little technical difficulty, but hopefully we will be joined by Colonel Cammermeyer as well. But for now, we'll go ahead and get started. And I would love to ask as a beginning question, I'd love to know a little bit about how this film came to be. So whose idea was it to make the film, and what was the process like?
Sure, I'll take that one since it was my idea that Pat and Barb joyfully joined in, thankfully. And I had screened my first film, Breaking Through, about openly LGBT elected officials at Sierra College. And they came up to me afterwards and we started talking, and they let me know that the following night they were going to be giving the keynote speech. And Barb started talking with me about how they had been together at that time at 30 years, now 36 years. And I thought, wow, what an amazing love story for two people to be able to stay together and stay in love for that long, even when they had to pretend that they weren't even together a lot of the times, not only for Colonel Pat's career, but also because of their own personal safety in their home and neighborhood. And I thought, wow, this is fascinating. And then she threw in the part about Col Margareta Kamameyer and the time when Colonel Pat and Colonel Greta's lives intersected in a significant history-making way. And I thought, whoa, I need to hear more about this. And so the next night I showed up to their speech, with my tripod on my shoulder and my camera, and just started filming. And by the time it was over, I went up to them and I said, Colonel Pat, Barb, I want to tell your story. And they're like, oh, okay. And I said, no, you don't understand. I want to make a movie about your story. And it was like, oh. So then started the conversation long distance over a couple months, and we figured it out. And they have been just such amazing partners in this, in terms of giving us access to everything, providing us, when you see the film, with just such incredible archival material. And one thing led to another, and we have a movie.
So great. And I believe that Colonel Cammermeyer has just joined us. Colonel Cammermeyer, thank you for being here, and thank you so much for your service as well.
Well, you're welcome. It's a delight, and sorry about the glitches in getting on.
That's okay. That's, you know, it's 2020. Nothing happens exactly the way we thought it might. Right? Well, so I'm interested, Colonel Pat and Barbara, if you would talk a little bit about, you know, what was it like to go from, you know, you for such a long time were not telling your story, and then you made the decision to participate in that event where you told your story so publicly, and now to have this documentary about it. Can you talk a little bit about what that is like, and how you sort of decided that was something you wanted to do?
Well, it was one way that I could come out to my military friends, because I had not done that. And because I really could not, at the time, it would not have been safe to do that. So, do you want to talk about it?
Well, I knew that Pat still had to work out some of the pain of having to dismiss Colonel Cammermeyer. And I also knew that people in the world should know that this story is needing to be told, absolutely needing to be told. And nobody knew, even Colonel Cammermeyer didn't know about Pat until a few years ago. Now it's been 25, I think, but still it was much later. So I thought this is a good way. We had given that one speech because we wanted to come out and share that story. And when Cindy offered us this opportunity to go on film instead of going out and speaking all around the world, figured that's much easier. But we had no idea that it was going to turn out to be COVID 2020. So this now is the only way that it's going to get out there. And that's kind of how it evolved in our minds, that it was time to share that story, to work on the healing and maybe finish the healing. I think maybe you're there now, and that felt good, and people were very excited to hear it. So it was a very good thing to do, and the filming was a lot of fun. When your whole house is turned into a movie set, it's kind of neat.
That's pretty great. And how long? Oh, sorry, Colonel Greta, what were you saying? Oops, we lost you. So how long was it? How long did it take to do that, the filming? How long was that process?
Off and on for 5 years. And if we had been able to get all the funding that we needed earlier, we would have finished the film earlier. But there was a really happy surprise, if you will, of having a different ending for our film. It was going to be this lovely story that these two women had made it through the dark times. And, we're going to walk off into the sunset together. And then there was an election. And they got fired up, and now we have a different ending where we see both Colonel Pat and Barb continuing to do volunteer work, but doing it at a whole new level. And so with having that gave us an additional year of time, but at the same time, it also, took longer to get the film out.
Right. Well, and I wonder, Mary, if you could talk a little bit about, thinking about what's happening right now in the world and the activism that's needed. What do you think about, as we think about specifically about LGBTQ+ rights in this country? What is the impact of a documentary like this being out right now?
Well, I think of that as more of a personal exploration that helps people understand how far we've come, and also gives insight into some of the history we already know about. We know about Greta's case, but I think it's remarkably poignant that the president of the board who had to discharge Greta turned out to be a lesbian herself, Colonel Pat. And it's particularly poignant for me to have been through that, to have, known Colonel Thompson as I knew her, and then to find out later that she was a lesbian also, and just the heavy burden she bore. And so I do think that that kind of personal story helps people understand, even when the legal threshold, the law has moved on, and it has. We have more rights now, although we're all afraid of what this administration can do. And it's the only way people do learn, is personally.
Yeah, absolutely. And Colonel Greta, we sort of alluded to the fact that your story had been told a little bit before. You had written a book, right? And then a film was made where Glenn Close played you, which I think is pretty cool. And I just wonder what sort of that difference, what it was like to have this documentary and to be involved in this documentary about that story as well.
My case came to I guess the notoriety around my case was that it beforehand, presumably, and so it was in many ways, because it was still, we had been muted so that nobody ever knew that we had normal lives.
Yeah.
And 25 years ago, when the people having it relived in some ways in surviving the silence, brought up continue to speak for truth.
We're having a little bit of a hard time hearing you. I think you broke up a little bit. Your connection must not be super strong, which is sad, because I think you were saying something about how important it is to be able to speak the truth while we were having a hard time hearing you. Is that what you were saying, that about the importance of speaking the truth and being able to be totally authentic? I think we'll try to come back to that question in a minute. So I would love to talk a little bit about also, Cindy, you alluded to this partway through the film. I suddenly went, oh my gosh, this is a love story. This is not sort of like a typical documentary about just about LGBTQ rights, but this is a love story, and I was so moved by that, and really invested, Colonel Pat and Barbara, in the conversation around your personal lives and your neighborhood. And I want to start by asking Cindy to talk a little bit about that sort of balance of love story and the story about what was happening with the case as well.
The first and foremost, draw for me was their love story. And, I'm a hopeless romantic, and so that always draws me in. And to do it in the environment in which they were able to do it was just fascinating to me. And so I wanted to explore that. How do you make love last when you have to pretend that you're not even in love? And how do you make love last when you're thousands of miles away, such as when Colonel Pat was the chief nurse of the Army National Guard and doing duty at the Pentagon, and their phones were tapped and they didn't know who might be opening her mail. So that's what got me at first. And I wanted to tell that story that love is possible. And even in the shadows, eventually love will win and does win. And to also reflect a bit on fierce love, not only romantic love, but the fierce love that Pat had for Barb and that Barb had for Pat, that made it possible for her to, while she might have been angry at the policies of her partner's employer, aka the military, she still loved Pat so much she was willing to set aside her own hopes and dreams of a career and what she wanted to do in life in order to be 100% supportive and to not be bitter and to not be resentful. I don't know that I would have been able to be that person. And so that really drew me in. And then, of course, with the additional part of history that gets woven in that shows what amount of discipline and integrity it takes to be able to work behind the scenes in order to get the best possible result in a really horrible situation.
Yeah. Well, and Colonel Pat and Barbara, I wonder if you would talk then a little bit about, you know, what Cindy's alluding to, the sort of the fact that you were hiding so much of your lives, and yet in the film we see the incredible joy in your lives as well. We see the joy in the home videos and the photos, and I just wonder if you would talk a little bit about how you keep that joy alive when you're struggling with your sort of your public life.
Well, it was I kind of liken it to the way I made my coming out. I took a long and slow time to do it, and I think that our relationship started at a certain point, and we just kind of traveled through it as it came. There wasn't, you know, there was no playbook for me anyway for a lesbian relationship. It was new to me. I was out a new baby dyke coming out at the age of 30, and I really didn't know how things were supposed to be. I knew a few stereotypes, so I had to learn along the way. But I also came from a family that was very much committed in relationship. My parents were loving, caring for each other, and would have continued doing so for the rest of their lives. But my father died very young and early, and that was a huge tragedy. So I knew that there were lots of obstacles that we had to overcome, but this is the relationship we wanted to have, and we were willing to do them along the way. And even though when you see the film, you'll see I think I say angry 3, 4, 25 times, because I was really born angry. I really was. And that motivates me for much of what I've done throughout my life. It kind of keeps me from going into the most deep depression. So that anger fueled me. And we have a lot of joy, and have had a lot of joy, and continue to have a lot of joy in our lives, even under the current circumstances.
Well, Barb has been so supportive to me all the way through, in so many ways. It would be difficult not to love her. And I had not been out to my family in North Carolina. They're very religious, so I had not come out to them until I was 80. And by that time, my parents were not around anymore, but the rest of my family were there. And so I did come out to them. And it was great because I just felt layers lifting off of my shoulders as I talked. And of course, they were not surprised, especially the younger ones. So
That's so great. I love that it sounds like it was a supportive coming out, which is so important.
yes.
Yeah. That's wonderful. Well, and Colonel Pat, there are so many powerful moments in this story, and one of the things that I kept thinking about, and I'm still thinking about, I watched it the other day, and still can't get out of my mind when you talked about having written all of the things that you wanted to say to Colonel Greta, and that you were only able to say one thing in the end. And that moment to me just felt it felt really untenable. And maybe I felt some of Barbara's anger. And I just wondered sort of how did you make it through that?
Well, the board that I was dealing with and working with had one homophobe on the board. I was informed, and the others were not quite as bad. But I would work in the evening and into the night, and then I would write down things that I thought would be a good thing to say. And then I would present it to the board the next morning, and they would just kind of nix almost everything. And I said, okay, but this is one thing I'm not giving up, and that is that if the military regulations change in the future in her favor, then this case must be looked at again. And so I got to keep that in, which was important to me.
Yes, absolutely. And your role in that review board allowed for Mary and Colonel Greta to bring more information back into an appeal. I'm understanding that correctly, right? Mary, can you talk?
Yes,
Mary? Sorry, can you talk a little bit about how important that was?
We had been in litigation in several other cases. I don't know if you've ever heard the name Dusty Pruitt, but her case had just come down from the Ninth Circuit. And essentially the courts were saying, we're not going to give you strict scrutiny. We're only going to give you rational basis. But as opposed to just saying, oh, it sounds good to us, we're going to let you give us information, show us evidence that either the regulation is discriminatory in terms of based on prejudice or other irrational basis. And so we had gathered a tremendous amount of information over the years of evidence showing that that gay service members were perfectly competent, and that every single basis for the regulation was premised on prejudice. And with Colonel Thompson, first of all, taking her time and forcing us to come to the hearing, she also allowed us to put on witnesses and depositions that were very powerful. And it's in particular some of the depositions of the military personnel who, just in speaking candidly about the policy, it was plain that it was based on prejudice. By giving us that opportunity, we established the record in front of the board. We knew that there was no choice for them. They had to withdraw Greta's federal recognition. But if we could get that evidence up to the court, that was our strategy. And it couldn't have been handled better than by Colonel Thompson. She gave an immensely poignant speech at the end that was very hard for all of us to hear, because it was so loving to Greta, and you don't expect that in one of these hearings. And so for her to give us that evidence and the opportunity to put up on that evidence, we were able to win her case eventually.
That's incredible. But it's so it's incredible that did you know, Colonel Pat, what you were providing for them?
I did not. I didn't understand the ultimate outcome. I really did not. I was just doing the best I could with what I had to do.
Yeah.
So,
to have a hospitable person running that board as she said, one of the other colonels was a homophobe. I mean, we wouldn't have been able to get anything in, and or we would have been stymied at every turn. And it's just absolutely the reason that Greta's case moved forward.
Wow. That's amazing.
Jenni, that's why I was so drawn in by this story. And even
Yeah.
more so, the more that I learned, you know, from Colonel Greta and from Mary about the legal machinations, if you will, behind the scenes, I was so fascinated that even though it was an impossible situation, right? Colonel Pat figured out what is the best thing I can do in this horrible situation in case somehow, someday, something might be able to restore Colonel Greta's career. And to have the strength and the presence of mind to do that at great risk to her own career, right? Because she didn't know if she herself was being investigated at that point, is such an act of bravery. And to be able to contribute from behind the scenes is, to me, a terrific example and the kind of courage that we each need to have right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and that sort of brings us to right now. I think, you know, Barbara, I wrote down like 5 of the things that you said in this documentary. And my favorite might have been, well, if this, you know, idiot can do it, I certainly can. I wrote it down like in capital letters. And that sort of it strikes me not only as a good, you know, sort of response to the window installer who abandoned the project, right? But also seems like a life philosophy. And, you know, I don't know how that connects to, or maybe it doesn't, but in my mind, it connected to your founding of the RATT Pack. And I wondered if you would talk a little bit about the RATT Pack and what that is.
Well, yes, the idiot referring in that particular sense is the one in the White House, you know, but he can't do it. The RATT Pack, I started as Resistance Action Tuesdays on Inauguration Day because Courage Campaign or Move On called for people to go out on Inauguration Day. Don't watch it on television, just be out there in front of preferably an office of one of your legislators and show the public how you feel and what you think. So we started that way, and it was RATT, Resistance Action Tuesdays. And then a few folks, once we gathered for a number of weeks, said, can you make it on Thursdays? So I said, sure, why not? We have nothing else to do, right, except be out here fighting for our lives and our country. So we had Tuesdays and Thursdays, RATT. And that group is now ongoing. Pat and I are pretty much sequestered in our home, hermetically sealed at times when the air is bad. But we, the folks who want to be out there and feel safe being out there are out there now. They asked me to continue sending out emails and notifying people and whatever theme they want to do. So now it's basically vote, vote, vote. And I felt strongly that if I had to save myself, it was selfish to start that group because I was in a desperate emotional state, knowing where this country was going to go. I didn't need to live through it. I felt like I was watching it happen in my mind. And certainly it has all played out even worse. And then we have COVID overlying that at this time. And that, of course, in this regime has played out as horribly, could not have been worse all over the world. So I'm saving myself by starting a support group, if you will, in that sense. And it has been such a support group for everybody involved. And the people who are out there now, they're continuing on. I feel good about that. I really wish, I wish we could be out there now. But at the same time, I need this time to kind of heal in a way and withdraw from that and spend some time with our film and doing these wonderful interviews all over the world and, you know, putting out the word that people will know. We all need to share our stories and live our true self, our true lives. And if that idiot can do it, I can certainly do it. So I'm doing it.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you so much for starting that. It seems like such a powerful group. So I really appreciate that. And I'm so thrilled that Colonel Greta is back with us on the screen. Thank you for struggling with your internet connection and being back here.
Yeah.
Colonel Greta, I wonder if you would talk a little bit about what it has been like. I asked the question earlier, but it was hard for us to hear you. What it's been like for you to participate in this film, knowing that you had already told your own story. So could you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I think the importance of participating in this story is that, Pat and Barb were sort of living the part that I was not. They were having to live in silence and stay within the military. And the backstory, of course, that I didn't know that she was a lesbian at the time she was in charge and president of my board. So that it was a surprise when I finally did find out. But it seemed important also to be able to have the opportunity to tell Pat how significant her participation and what she enabled us to do, and my attorneys, that is, in terms of depositions and everything, so that ultimately, once I was discharged, that we had the case or the information to be able to take it into federal court, where my esteemed attorney did her utmost and succeeded.
It's so wonderful that you that appeal did succeed. So I'm so thrilled for you. Now, can you tell me, did you, Colonel Greta and Colonel Pat, you were aware of each other before, or had known each other before the case came up in '92?
Well, Colonel Pat was my boss in terms of the military. So we were both in the reserve forces at the time, but so we had worked together in different capacities on exercises and things like that. But otherwise, we did not, know. I mean, I knew nothing about her personal history or anything until after my discharge. And I don't know if it's been mentioned, but I was sort of doing the university lecture circuit, and after a presentation at UC Davis, this short woman came up and handed me a business card, and it said, Barbara Bass and Pat Thompson. And before I saw that card, I had no idea that Pat was a lesbian. And I'm really grateful for that, because I don't think that I would ever have encouraged her to stay on as president of the board, because I would have realized what an ethical dilemma that would have been for her. So I'm glad I didn't know until I knew.
That's wonderful. That's great. Well, as we kind of wrap this conversation up, I mean, I could spend all night talking with all of you, but as we wrap this conversation up, I've been thinking a lot about how the stories that we tell influence the lives that our young people lead. And I wonder if any of you have any words of, I don't know, encouragement or hope, or just thoughts for our young LGBTQ plus siblings.
I've got a feeling that everyone does.
Good.
And especially today on National Coming Out Day. I know my personal connection from afar as a fan to Colonel Greta Kamameyer started when her case started. And she was one of the role models I looked up to and said, wow. And so I think that, I guess there's two things for other people, whether they're young or not so young in terms of age, is it's never too late to come out. We can find a way to come out, and we'll be able to find people who are supportive. Now, that doesn't mean everybody all the time in this moment, But I think as we prepare ourselves to come out, we can find ways to identify people who are going to be supportive and who are just waiting. So many times I've talked with people who have said, oh, I came out to my parents and they said, well, we knew, but we didn't want to say anything because we figured if you wanted us to know, you would tell us. And often people are just waiting for us to take that next step forward in our lives and are ready and willing and able to support us. So find a way, because there's often a way. Let's not live in fear, but rather look at the possibilities that may be available to us.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you, Cindy.
You know, in all of these years where I have been talking to people and gotten emails, I have never once gotten any comment about, you know, I'm sorry I came out. Because it has such a freeing effect that all of a sudden, I mean, obviously you have to come out to everybody again and again and again and again, even if it's the postwoman, that you end up coming out in some way, but no one has ever said, you know, I wish I hadn't done that.
I also think it's the foundation of our legal success. I think in many ways, a lot of our cases are simply about someone coming out in their job, someone trying to do something and being refused. And coming out is the thing that moves us into, and as some people have said, makes us human to other people. They have to examine their stereotypes. And so the coming out process is actually part and parcel of our legal strategy.
Yeah.
And then in our area, we have a lot of young men, particularly, who have been thrown out of their homes when their parents have found out that they were gay. And we have an absolutely wonderful LGBTQ center where they can go and they can get help. And we support that, as do a lot of other people in the area. So that works really well for our young LGBT men.
And young women.
And young women.
And trans.
Men,
and many trans people are now coming out and finding solace there. And one thing I wanted to say about coming out, besides coming out, is that it's not an assumption that people know. The way I see it is that when you come out directly is the only time they can actually believe that they are correct or incorrect. You know, they have assumptions, they have ideas, they probably all figured it out, like Pat was saying, the young people probably in her family figured it out. But until you voice it and say it and come clean with it and be out with it, it's just a story in someone's head. And until you share your real story, the truth, then it is truly coming out, and it has the impact on the people who hear it as well as on the person who shares it. And to me, it's all positive. I think even when somebody loses family members or friends or whatever, there's a huge community of support out there, and it's available, and I think it's getting more openly available in many areas, not just digging in on one little Google search. You know, it's very much available even for people in small towns and way back places. So coming out it's a lifelong process, as Greta said.
Absolutely. Thank you. Oh, sorry, Colonel Pat, go ahead.
I had picked up a pamphlet at a PFLAG conference that said what Jesus said about homosexuality, and you open it and it's blank. And so I took that to North Carolina and shared that with my family. I just wanted to say that.
That's fantastic. Well, I love that.
Could I just ask Pat a question?
Yes.
When you came out to your family at 80, was there anybody who was surprised?
No, I don't. I have one nephew that won't talk to me. He's very religious, but the others have been okay with it.
But they weren't surprised.
No, they were not. It's an answer to your question.
I love that all of your responses were about support and how important that is. So thank you so much. What a great a great thing to say. I think there might be a comment in the chat. Hold on one moment. I'm not seeing it. Sorry, I don't see the question.
There's a question that's for Barb, and it says, how did you do coping with knowing that Pat would have to keep things secret? And I love that question because to me, it speaks about love, it speaks about commitment, and it speaks about resistance.
How did I cope? I just knew I had to. During the time Pat was at the Pentagon, those 3 years, I was writing copious letters and cards, which she had to throw away, and I kept the ones she sent me. And I was making little cassette tapes from the 312th support group here in Roseville, which was me sending little love tapes to her. And I just filled my time with learning how to do construction and knew that there was an end date. That was helpful, an end date. She was going to finish that tour at X day, and then we could move on to the rest of our lives. Little did I know that it was going to be harder when she spent her 6 months in the jungles of Panama. But that was still to come. But yeah, I knew I had to, so I did, and did what I could do to make it all work.
Thank you for that. And I think I think we lost Cindy. If we can get Cindy back here with everyone. I want to thank you all. As I said earlier, I could absolutely spend all night chatting with you. Watching this documentary was really powerful to me. So thank you so much for Cindy. Thank you for making it. Colonel Pat and Barbara, thank you for telling your story like that. It's so beautiful and so impactful. And Mary and Colonel Greta, thank you for all of your work. It really is so important and I think life-changing for so many people. So I want to close this up also by thanking you all for being here tonight. And I want to thank also our ASL interpreters, Meg and Sam. Thank you so much. And also to our producer, Paul Allen, who we'd be lost without. So thank you, everyone. And please enjoy the rest of the festival. And again, thank you.
Thank you, Jenny.
Bye.
Bye.
Good.